When my wife walked out on me for another man, she didn't just leave me, she took my whole world with her. Even my own son turned his back, telling me I was nothing more than mom's ex. But I still had one card left to play, a move they never expected, one that could shatter their shiny new life. And the day I laid that evidence down in court, the judge leaned in and whispered something that froze the entire room. My name's Dwayne Dona. I'm 59 years old, and for 35 years I made my living as a mechanic before hanging up my tools. I ran a modest little shop on the edge of Phoenix. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave my family a safe home. I never needed much, just my tools, my old pickup, and my loved ones. That was enough for me. Henry was only 5 when I married his mom, Linda. Back then he was a timid kid, scared of everything, jumping at loud noises and hiding behind her whenever strangers came around. His biological dad, Eddie, was a disaster, always in and out of jail, drifting in and out of their lives, leaving nothing but broken promises and unpaid debts. When Eddie vanished for good, I didn't think twice. That boy needed a father, and I needed him. I taught Henry how to throw a baseball, how to swap out a flat, how to shake a man's hand with confidence. I watched him grow from that skittish little boy into a young man who could rebuild a motor without blinking. We spent countless weekends elbow deep in grease at my garage, working side by side on his first ride, a battered Camaro we rescued from a junkyard. I was proud of the man he was becoming. When Henry turned 8, Linda and I decided to make it official. I adopted him, gave him my last name, so he'd always know he belonged. The ceremony was simple, just us in a small courthouse. He wore his Little League uniform because it was the nicest thing he had, and when the judge declared him my son, the grin on his face looked like it might split his cheeks in two. But life has a way of blindsiding you. Last month, I came home from the hardware store to find Linda in our bedroom, filling boxes. No tears, no explanation, just cold, efficient packing. She didn't even glance at me when she said the words, "I found someone else, Dwayne. I'm moving out." Henry, now 17 and taller than me, stood in the doorway watching. He didn't say a word, just folded his arms like he was bored with the scene. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, sitting in this empty house, the tick of the clock echoing off the walls, I'm starting to realize some things don't heal. Some things can't be fixed. Those first weeks after she left were brutal. Not because I missed Linda, though I did, but because Henry cut me out completely. The kid who used to text me about everything suddenly stopped calling altogether. Silence. Like the last 13 years of father and son never happened. I kept going through the motions anyway. Still bought his favorite cereal. Still left the porch light on just in case. Old habits die hard. The garage was the hardest. Without Henry there peppering me with questions about engines and transmissions, it felt hollow. The Camaro we'd been restoring sat half-finished under a layer of dust. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened. Meanwhile, Linda had moved in with a guy named Brad, some marketing or consulting type, the kind who wears designer jeans and drives a BMW. Everything I wasn't. Then Henry's truck broke down. Transmission trouble. He sent me a text, just 4 words, truck acting up again. 20 minutes later, I was outside his apartment with my toolbox. We worked in the driveway for 3 hours, barely talking except when he needed a tool. For a moment, it felt like old times. As I checked the fluids, he muttered, "Thanks for helping." I looked up. "That's what fathers do, son." Something flickered in his eyes, like the word son didn't quite fit anymore. When we finished, he wiped his hands and said, "I should go. Linda's making dinner." Not mom, just Linda. Like she was just some lady. Watching him drive off hurt worse than watching Linda leave. That night I dug out the adoption papers. Signed, stamped, legal proof that Henry was mine, no matter how he acted. 3 months into this new reality, I was under the hood of a neighbor's car when a police cruiser pulled into my drive. My stomach dropped. You don't get surprise visits from cops unless it's bad. Out stepped Officer Williams, an old high school buddy. Hat in hand, he told me, "Dwayne, I hate to tell you this, but we picked up Henry last night." The wrench slipped out of my hand. Picked him up for what? A bar fight downtown. Nobody seriously hurt, but property got damaged. The owner pressed charges. My heart sank. Henry was never the type to start fights. Then Williams added, "We tried calling his mom and Brad. No answer for 6 hours. But Henry's been sitting in lockup asking for his dad. Not Linda. Not Brad. Me. Minutes later, I was posting bail. When they opened the cell, Henry looked smaller somehow, shirt torn, knuckles raw. He whispered, "You came." I stared hard at him. "Did you think I wouldn't?" He followed me out without another word. On the drive home, I caught him watching me in the reflection of the window, like he was trying to solve a riddle. Some things don't need words. Sometimes you just let the silence speak. He slept in his old room that night. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast cut diagonal, just like when he was a kid. We ate quietly until he said, "Thanks for bailing me out." Linda and Brad were probably too busy with their wine-tasting weekend to answer. His voice carried a bitterness I'd never heard. I set my mug down. "You want to tell me what really happened?" He toyed with his eggs before answering. Some college guys were trash-talking stepdads, saying only losers play daddy to kids that aren't theirs. Said guys like that just want the mom. I told them to shut up, that my stepdad was more of a man than their fathers would ever be. They laughed, said I probably got dumped by my fake dad too, because that's what happens when the novelty wears off. My fists clenched under the table. Henry's voice cracked as he finished. "I couldn't let them say that about you, Dwayne. You're my real dad." And in that moment, everything made sense. His distance, his silence, it wasn't rejection. It was fear of losing me all over again. 2 weeks later, we ran into Linda and Brad outside a coffee shop. Brad sneered at me. "Still playing house with other people's kids, huh?" I kept my voice calm. "Just spending time with my son." Brad laughed in my face. "Your son? DNA doesn't lie. You're just Mom's ex. Stay out of our life." Before I could answer, Henry stepped forward. His voice was steady. "This man taught me how to be decent. That makes him more of a father than any DNA ever could." The whole parking lot went silent. Brad's smugness vanished. Linda went pale. And I just stood there, proud of the young man beside me. But peace never lasts. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call that turned my world upside down. It was a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Eddie Ramsey, Henry's biological father. Well, he rasped. "Heard my boy's been getting into trouble." My grip tightened on the phone. "Your boy? You lost that right years ago." Eddie chuckled, low and bitter. "Blood is blood, mechanic. And I never signed away my rights. Just because you played house doesn't make you his dad. Got myself a lawyer now. Says I've got a shot at custody. Especially since his mama can't exactly claim stability anymore." Then he hung up. I drove straight to Linda's place demanding answers. She sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, looking worn. When I explained Eddie's call, she sighed. "I thought you knew." The court said abandonment was enough to proceed, even without his signature. I figured it was solid. Her eyes met mine, full of fear. "Eddie called me too. Says he's clean now. Found religion. Wants to make amends. Claims with the divorce, neither of us can offer a stable home. Dwayne, what if he actually wins?" In that moment, I realized, whatever had happened between us, Linda and I were about to become allies. Because no matter what, Henry deserved to stay with the people who had actually raised him, not with some stranger who just happened to share his DNA. And then, the very next morning, Henry called me himself. His voice was shaky. "Dwayne, we need to talk. Something strange happened last night." I was already reaching for my keys. When I walked into the diner, Henry was already sitting in our old booth. He looked exhausted, like sleep had been avoiding him for days. He stirred sugar into a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking and began explaining what had gone down. A man had shown up at Brad's place the night before, claiming to be his real father. Linda turned pale the moment she saw him. Eddie looked different. Clean haircut, new clothes, even teeth that suggested a recent visit to the dentist. But Henry said the whole act felt off, like a stage performance where the actor hadn't quite learned his lines. Henry's voice grew firmer as he went on. Eddie kept calling him son, and painting pictures of fishing trips, baseball games, and father-son bonding, like he could just reappear after 9 years and pretend nothing had happened. My fists tightened under the table. I asked him, "What did you say?" For the first time since Linda left, Henry locked eyes with me. I told him I already have a father. Told him you were there for every important moment while he was off doing whatever deadbeats do when they vanish. Something inside me finally loosened, a weight that had been pressing on my chest for months. In spite of everything, Henry still saw me as his dad. But he wasn't finished. His voice dropped. Serious now. Here's what really gets me. Eddie knew details about the custody situation, about Linda leaving you, even about the legal loopholes. How does a guy who's been gone almost a decade suddenly know everything? It was a sharp question. Too sharp. Eddie might be unreliable, but someone was clearly feeding him information and backing him with the kind of legal strategy a drifter couldn't afford. Henry leaned closer across the booth. Dwayne, I need you to understand something. No matter what happens in court, you're my father. Not because of some papers, but because you showed up. Every single day for 13 years, you showed up. I had to clear my throat before I could answer. I'm not going anywhere, son. No matter what Eddie or his lawyer tries to pull. Henry nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. Brad's been on edge since Eddie appeared, like he's hiding something. And Linda keeps sneaking off to make calls she doesn't want anyone to hear. We sat in that booth like generals mapping out a war plan. Because whatever storm was coming, we'd face it together. Some bonds are tougher than blood, stronger than legal papers, and harder to break than the lies of desperate people trying to rewrite history. Walking into the Phoenix family courthouse felt like stepping into enemy territory. Cold marble floors that made every footstep echo, harsh fluorescent lights that drained the color from people's faces, wooden benches heavy with the weight of families torn apart. I sat in the back row, wearing my best shirt and the tie Henry had given me 3 Father's Days ago. Linda sat near the front with her lawyer, a jittery man named Peterson who shuffled papers like he expected them to burst into flames. Henry sat beside her, uncomfortable in a suit that didn't fit a 17-year-old who belonged in jeans and boots. Eddie arrived like he was making an entrance on stage. Clean-shaven, expensive suit, flanked by a high-powered attorney who looked like she belonged on a billboard. This wasn't the wreck who had disappeared 9 years ago. His lawyer, Caroline Hayes, radiated confidence, her voice smooth and calculated as she laid out his case. Your Honor, she said, my client has overcome significant struggles and is now prepared to provide his son with a stable, loving home. He's been employed for 18 months, maintains a safe residence, and has completed both parenting and substance abuse programs. Judge Patricia Moreno, a stern woman in her 60s, listened without a flicker of emotion. She'd probably heard this same story 1,000 times. Deadbeat parents suddenly rediscovering responsibility when it suited them. Peterson tried to push back, reminding the court of Eddie's long history of abandonment, but he lacked Hayes' polish. Then Hayes dropped her bomb. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that the adoption 12 years ago was never legally valid. Mr. Ramsey's rights were not properly terminated, making Mr. Dona's adoption invalid. The courtroom froze. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Henry turned to look at me, pale with shock. Peterson tried to object, but Hayes came armed with documents. Court files showing Eddie's missing signature, legal precedents of adoptions overturned on technicalities. Judge Moreno called for a recess to review. During the break, Henry came straight to me, ignoring the stares from Eddie's side. His voice was steady. This is garbage, Dwayne. He doesn't get to show up after 9 years and treat me like property. I put a hand on his shoulder. We'll fight, son. Whatever it takes. But deep down, I knew this fight would demand more than I'd ever faced before. When court resumed, Judge Moreno's expression had changed. She summoned both lawyers to the bench. Hayes returned smug. Peterson looked like he'd seen lightning strike. Then Moreno addressed the room. After reviewing the records, the court notes significant irregularities. Mr. Dona legally adopted Henry Ramsey in 2011, with all necessary documentation. If that's true, then why did Mrs. Dona's divorce petition 3 months ago make no mention of child custody? If he is the legal adoptive father, custody should have been central. The question dropped like a bomb. Linda's face drained of color. Peterson stammered, Your Honor, my client assumed since Henry was living with her, no arrangement was required. The judge's voice turned cold. Assumptions are not law. This court now questions whether Mrs. Dona has been misrepresenting her parental authority. Hayes tried to intervene, but Judge Moreno silenced her with a glare. Furthermore, the records confirm Mr. Ramsey's rights were terminated properly in 2011. The documents you submitted refer to another case entirely. The heir left the room. Eddie's confidence collapsed, and Hayes frantically shuffled her papers, realizing her case had just been obliterated. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Dona, approach." My legs felt heavy as I walked forward. Her voice was calm, clear. "According to these records, you are Henry Dona's sole legal parent. The adoption was valid, Mr. Ramsey's rights were terminated, and your ex-wife had no legal standing to make custody decisions without court approval." The words struck like lightning. Henry's face lit with recognition. The room fell into silence. Linda's mouth hung open. Eddie looked like a man who had just learned his winning lottery ticket was fake. And Henry, he looked at me like he truly saw me again, maybe for the first time in months. Because sometimes the truth really is simple. The man who shows up every day is the only father who matters. Legally, emotionally, in every way that counts. The days after the hearing revealed the missing piece. My gut had been right. Eddie hadn't orchestrated this on his own. Henry overheard Linda and Brad arguing and discovered Brad had been feeding Eddie information for months, even funding his legal fight. Brad's plan was cruel but simple. If Eddie got custody, I'd be out of the picture, and Linda would stop feeling guilty about me. Henry told me what he'd heard, his voice shaking with anger. He was willing to wreck my relationship with you just to make his life easier. Then Henry's voice hardened. I told Mom exactly what I thought of her choices. Packed my stuff that night. I'm done pretending that house is home. My real family is here. Paperwork moved fast after that. Judge Moreno expedited custody, exposing Brad's manipulation and Eddie's fraud. Eddie vanished as quickly as he'd reappeared, abandoned by both Brad and his expensive lawyer. Linda showed up at my door days later, broken and in tears. I never wanted it to go this far, Dwayne. I didn't want Henry hurt. My voice stayed level, though I wanted to slam the door. But you let it happen anyway. She nodded, crying harder. Brad convinced me Henry needed a clean break. I thought it would help him adjust. I looked at the woman I once loved and saw only a stranger. I can forgive you, Linda. But Henry, that's who you need to worry about. And that'll take more than words. 6 months later, Henry and I had rebuilt our rhythm. Breakfast together, evenings in the garage, weekends working on projects. The Camaro we started years ago finally roared back to life, and Henry passed his driver's test in it on the first try. Watching him take the wheel of the car we'd restored felt like a victory we both needed. One night, polishing the hood, Henry looked up. "You know what I realized, Dwayne? Being a dad isn't about DNA or paperwork. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard." His words hit me harder than any courtroom ruling ever could. The divorce wrapped up quietly. Linda kept her Scottsdale house. I kept our home and the garage. Henry chose to stay with me. His decision was never in doubt. Brad didn't last long after the truth came out. Linda eventually saw him for who he was and walked away. Henry settled back into school, grades climbing, future looking bright. He started talking about college, automotive engineering, of course. Then one evening, while handing me a wrench, he said, "I want to change my last name back to Dona. Not because I have to, because I want to. That's who I am." The paperwork was simple compared to everything we'd endured, but the meaning was enormous. When they called Henry Dona across the stage at graduation, I was the proudest father in that room. Not because of his grades or plans for the future, but because that name carried everything we had fought for. Loyalty, commitment, love that never gave up. Some bonds can't be broken by divorce papers, custody battles, or the schemes of selfish people. Some bonds only grow stronger when tested, like steel forged in fire. Henry Dona was my son, and I was his father. Everything else was just paperwork.